Kingdom Hearts, a 2002 RPG that spawned an entire franchise and is considered to be one of the very best PlayStation 2 games of all time. The main theme for this retrospective is why. Why did this game become successful and does it still hold up today? Well, I'll start with the first question. Kingdom Hearts, despite its genre as an RPG game, is essentially a crossover game, similar to Marvel vs. Capcom. It brings two very separate things together, blending those two franchises together while using new characters set in their own story. For all accounts, this game should have failed. It should have been a complete bomb from day one. There's two reasons why this game took off and became successful. Number one, the game focused on its original characters instead of the on-brand characters people already knew, crafting a story that was kept very simple. Number two, Disney. Disney made this game work. Without Disney, Kingdom Hearts would have failed. It would have bombed out of the gate. For non-fans of this game, and the franchise as a whole, you look at Kingdom Hearts and you ask yourself, just what the hell is this? I see all these Disney characters in here. I see some anime-looking characters in here. What is the selling point? Is this a kid's game, or what's the purpose here? A big part of what makes Kingdom Hearts work is that you get to play through these Disney IPs and relive the story of these movies in a unique way with an original, overarching story. It's actually rather interesting watching it play out. I'll just be blunt with it. Anyone who claims to be a hater of Disney simply doesn't have a soul. Yes, Disney deserves all the criticism they've received for how they've handled their live-action remakes and other franchises like Star Wars, for example. But Kingdom Hearts predates all of that by a long stretch, and the IP has yet to explore any of the live-action remakes, Star Wars, or Marvel franchises. The Disney properties here are the classic Renaissance era of Disney with hand-drawn animation before we entered the modern realm of 3D animation. Films like Hercules, Tarzan, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, and more are given their spotlight here, and the writers took great care to present these characters the way they were presented in the original films they come from. This gives the game a universal appeal automatically because it's Disney. By contrast, Final Fantasy, which is the other major crossover brand here, is downplayed significantly, and that's actually for the better. There's only specific characters in here from basically two different games in that franchise, not counting the cameos from Final Fantasy X in the prologue stage. What's more, these characters are used in the original story with zero mention of the stories from the games they originate from. Square Enix actually did something smart with the Final Fantasy characters, which are used sparingly as original characters rather than characters that people already knew. They're naturally inserted in the original story here, which helps make the crossover theme work tremendously. The writers were smart enough to know that Disney is by far the bigger of the two major IP with the crossover, and they decided to focus on Disney overwhelmingly more than the Final Fantasy stuff, which is rightfully kept to a minimum. And the Final Fantasy stuff that's there mainly comes from Final Fantasy VII, which is the most popular game in that franchise. The crossover was handled appropriately. Where Kingdom Hearts stumbles, but doesn't completely fall, is with the original story itself. Tetsuya Nomura is the mastermind behind this franchise, and that's ultimately what ended up hurting Kingdom Hearts with later games. However, the criticisms of the later games, when it comes to the storytelling, can also be applied here. The original story in this game, and just this game, works on a very basic level. The entire game is about a young teenage boy who is taken from his homeworld and makes it his mission to find his two missing friends. Sora's story is kept very simple, at least in this game. It's everything around Sora in the original story that's the problem. There are very vague terms that are just thrown around at random that the player is given no context on, from the very start of the game to the end of the game, including Kingdom Hearts itself. Words like light and darkness and heart are used incessantly without actually explaining just what the hell the characters that use these terms are actually referring to. There's a legion of unanswered questions, interesting questions, but unanswered nonetheless, that the later sequels to this game tries to answer in varying degrees. The game tries to sound smarter than it actually is, and it basically boils down to being just a bunch of nonsensical bullshit that was stupid from the very beginning, although this isn't made apparent until you play the later games in the franchise. So, on its own, Kingdom Hearts, when it comes to the original story, it works, but barely. It's not particularly smart as much as it's lucky that it has the Disney characters to fall back on, as the Disney stuff eclipses just how dumb the original story actually is. The story in Kingdom Hearts should be thought of like this. Boy wants to find his friends who are missing. There you go. Once you start acknowledging all of the other stuff and you put some thought into it, the story and the game itself falls apart immediately, gameplay-wise. Kingdom Hearts is also in a strange gray area. Even for its time, mechanically speaking, this is a bad game. It's just not good. It's an ARPG where you spam one button to attack, and it doesn't have much depth in the way of its combat system. Now, the later entries in the series have experimented a great deal, but with this first game, what you see is what you get. It's very basic from start to finish. You get other abilities and some combo extenders, but these things don't fundamentally change the combat itself. It's very minute in its attempt at bringing essentially the Final Fantasy combat system into a real-time action game. Something that was officially attempted far better many years later with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which had problems on its own, but I won't get into that here. You start out with a basic 3-hit ground and air combo that can be upgraded to a 5+ hit combo by the end of the game. But you also often find Sora awkwardly flailing at thin air. Most of your attacks somehow miss your target, often making the game frustrating to play on any difficulty setting. Your AI companions are nearly useless most of the game because they simply can't stay alive. Donald especially is the more frustrating of the two because he's down in combat from almost any attack to the point where you ask yourself, why is he even here? Yet you have to keep him on screen despite the fact that Goofy is the more reliable party member if you're playing on Proud Mode because he heals you when you're not in the position to do so yourself. Hell, the Disney characters who become your party members in each stage are more reliable than both Donald and Goofy. All of them. The combat in this game is so basic and flawed, yet it's strangely fun. It's frantic in a good way, it's surprisingly responsive, it's fluid in the sense that the tempo of the combat itself is maintained. The battles are fast-paced, and unlike many JRPGs that make the fatal mistake of limiting the player to a specific vicinity to fight in, you can go anywhere you want in the stage when enemies appear, and if you can't or don't want to fight them, you can simply just run past them and leave the area. The programmers here deserve all the praise for making the combat system work, as the magic behind the combat system really comes from them, because the concept of the game from a mechanical standpoint is extremely weak and ineffective. Could there be more depth to the combat system? Yes, there could have, but there's just enough there to make it work. Again, barely. Regarding the overall content, Kingdom Hearts is actually somewhat stacked. Aside from the main story, you're given a Colosseum to fight in various stage battles, including against the Final Fantasy characters. You're given 5 unique secret bosses, those being the Ice Titan from Hercules, Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII, who by this time in 2002 was not seen in full 3D like this, the Kurt Zisa boss in the Aladdin stage, which was a very creative fight on its own, the Phantom boss, which was very challenging in the Peter Pan stage, and the Unknown Man, who turned out to be Xemnas, the final boss in Kingdom Hearts 2, the sequel to this game, which is an excellent and effective use of foreshadowing. One of the very best I've seen, in fact, for a video game. You have mini-games in the Winnie the Pooh stage. You have weapons to craft, treasure chests to find, Trinity seals to unlock. You can revisit any previous stage in the game. There's quite a bit of content here, with most of it being exhausted in over 30 hours. It's a fairly competent RPG that doesn't overstay its welcome. The glaring faults would be some elements of the level design, which are uninspired, with several rooms in different stages looking very similar to each other, and some even identical to the point where it's easy to get lost, even if only briefly. And the gummy ship stuff admittedly sucks ass. It's not fun. It's out of place. The pacing of the gummy missions are off because it's on rails. It's just a mindless chore and probably sounded better on paper than in practice. The last thing I'll add is that Kingdom Hearts has one of the very best soundtracks I've heard in a video game, even to this day. There's not a single bad track in this game, not one. Whether you're dealing with the songs played in the Disney levels, or the One-Winged Angel Sephiroth theme, or the original songs which are a standout here, the soundtrack is just bursting with energy from start to finish. There's a reason why Yoko Shimomura, the composer, has been kept throughout the series. There would be no Kingdom Hearts without her, and the artist Utada Hikaru does a fantastic job with the original song Simple and Clean, which is one of the best original songs for a Japanese game, or a Japanese anything for that matter, that I've personally seen. Square Enix providing an English version was a smart move. I'll leave it at that. All in all, Kingdom Hearts is a good game, despite its glaring faults, but it does foreshadow hints of the series' downfall in terms of quality.